Welcome everyone to Daf Yomi Masechet Nedarim. This is our sixth lesson, and today we are going to be reviewing Daf 36 to 41, which even though at the time of this live class, we're going all the way till next Monday. So those of you who are doing the Daf, you'll be a few days ahead. Okay, let's begin on Daf 36. We ended up last week discussing, or a few days ago, discussing if the priests, if the Kohanim are our agents to God or God's agents in this world for us or to us. So here on Daf 36, the Gemara tells us that the Kohen can do the priestly work in the temple for that person's sacrifice, even if he's not allowed to get benefit from him. Meaning, that seems to prove that the Kohen is actually the agent of God, right? A shaliach of Hashem. And then the Gemara says, no, not necessarily. Maybe it's only those specific sacrifices that we mentioned, and not all sacrifices. And the Gemara then goes into the idea of, we learned this more in Masechet Psachim, the idea of accidentally or maybe even intentionally messing up the thoughts while doing a sacrifice, while doing a korban, right? This is called pigul. And if the Kohen did this on purpose, so then, right, meaning he thought that, oh, I'm going to eat this sacrifice in the wrong place or in the wrong time, this disqualifies the sacrifice, and then the Kohen has to pay back the person whose sacrifice he messed up. If he did it by accident, b'shogeg, then he is not obligated. He is exempt from paying it back, but it still messed up the korban, right? Therefore, that seems to imply that the Kohen is an agent of God, because right here he messed up, and it doesn't, and it still is problematic, right? If he was a messenger of a person, the person can say, listen, I wanted you to be my messenger or my agent only if this was going to be a valid korban. But if it's not a valid sacrifice, then I don't want you to do it, and then it shouldn't count. But it does, which makes us understand that the Kohen is really an agent of God. Okay, and from here, the Gemara tells us that all sacrifices need intent, right? Proper intent that this is a sacrifice that you want to bring, except for the specific sacrifices that are people who are lacking atonement. In Hebrew, it's called mechusar kapara, which means that they went through a ritual process of becoming pure, and they went to the mikvah, and now the only thing left for them to do is to bring this sacrifice, right? That is the zav, the zava, the yoledet, a woman who gave birth. These are mechusar kapara, so those don't seem to need intent. Right, and therefore, right, a husband can bring a sacrifice for his wife, and therefore they can have, right, a person can be an agent for another person. And since we're talking about this, the Gemara goes into the topic of Korban Pesach, which those of you who have learned Masechet Psachim, this will be a good review. If you remember, everyone needs to sign up for the Korban Pesach, and then they can be part of the group. And the Gemara here tells us, quoting what we learned in Masechet Psachim, that you can't bring the Korban Pesach for your friend without his knowledge, because maybe he signed up to be in another group. And also, a minor can be counted in the group, right? But this is not biblical. This is just rabbinic. And we said that everyone must be registered before the animal is slaughtered, right? And then there was, I don't know if you remember, there was a story about a father who wanted to make sure that his children quickly came to Jerusalem. So what did he do? He made a race, right? And he said, on your mark, get set, go. The first child who gets to Jerusalem will be part of my Korban Pesach. But the Gemara says, wait a minute, right? Isn't it already Erev Pesach? Didn't he already have to bring the Korban? And the answer is really the father had intention to have all his children part of this sacrifice, but he wanted to make them go faster, so he made it into a race. But really, you can't, right? It can't be that they already slaughtered the Korban Pesach and then they decide who's going to be part of the group. Okay, since we're talking about doing things with his knowledge, without his knowledge, our Mishnah said that you can separate truma with this person's knowledge. Again, we're talking about, and the whole chapter is going to be talking about the same idea. One person says, I will not get any benefit from you. Now, what is the relationship? Really, it seems like the relationship should be severed. You can't do anything for me because I can't get any benefit from you. The Gemara teaches us, actually, the Mishnah, and then the Gemara teach us that actually anything that I'm obligated to do, you can do for me because I have an obligation to do it anyway. So one of these things is to separate truma, right? Truma are the priestly gifts that you take off from your produce. And as long as I know, right, the person has knowledge that you're doing it, then it works. So now the Gemara is asking, right, a person can separate his own produce and have his friend in mind, right? I use my own and have you in mind, even if he doesn't know, or maybe not. Maybe he needs to know because maybe the person wants to do it themselves, right? We have a concept in Jewish law that in Hebrew, the concept is Zachin Adam Shelo Befanav. I can do something positive. I can do something for you without your knowledge if I know that it's positive, right? So if you are getting a package and I know it's something that you want, you've been waiting for this package, I can go pick up the package for you because I know that you're going to want it. The Gemara is always going to question, we have to make sure that whatever action we're doing is really positive, right? So here we would think, oh, you're separating truma for me. Great, it's one less thing I have to do today. Or you can say, no, it's a mitzvah. I wanted to do the mitzvah. Therefore, I needed to know before you did it that you're doing it for me. Here, the Gemara continues. Someone takes, right, originally we said, like, I can take truma from my produce and have you in mind. Can I take truma from your produce, right? Can I do that from yours? And here it says, right, if someone takes from his friend's produce without his knowledge, it must be that he said, right, the friend must have said, whoever wants to take truma for me, go right ahead. I let you, right? Then that becomes knowledge, right? Da'at, he said someone else can do it, and then it's okay. Or maybe, right, he needs to actually have appointed a specific person, and then it would be okay. Okay, right? So the one who owns the grain is going to get the benefit. Or, right, again, remember we were talking about you are not allowed to have benefit. So the question is, who gets benefit from this interaction? Is it the person who owns the produce, the grain, or whatever it is, right? Maybe that's the person who gets the benefit. Or is it the one who's actually separating it that gets the benefit? Because when you separate it, you decide who to give it to, and then you get the benefit. So the Gemara says the law is that it's the one who separates it is the one who's getting benefit. Right? What about, can someone sanctify an animal for his friend? Right? So, and then let's say you do that and it gets a blemish. So now you need to redeem that animal, and then you add a fifth, And then, right, that's how you can redeem the animal. So if you, the one who, again, now we have to see, is it the one who owned the animal or the one who sanctified it, has to add a fifth in this scenario. So again, can we learn from here about truma? Right? Again, sorry. And then we say also in terms of tmura, right? We learned tmura means, right? One is if the animal gets a blemish, a mum, so then you can redeem the animal. The animal is now not holy anymore, not sanctified, and with the money, you go get a different animal. If an animal does not have a blemish and you try to transfer the sanctity to another animal, it works, but it doesn't get rid of the initial sanctity. So now you actually have two animals that are sanctified. This Gemara tells us that the one who sanctifies the animal is the one who adds a fifth, but the person who owned the animal, or the person who it was for, right, for his sacrifice, he's the one who does tmura, not the one who sanctified it. We also learned in the Mishnah last week that a person can teach, right? Again, he says, I can't have benefit from you. He can actually teach him halacha, the laws, but not Torah, right? Not the actual Tanakh. The Gemara asks why? Because he's going to get benefit for learning Torah. The Gemara said, well, maybe it's about people who get paid to teach, right? Maybe the person, right? Maybe it depends on the place that they live, and do they pay teachers who teach Torah? And from here, Daf 37 continues to tell us that that there are that first of all, you cannot charge for teaching halacha, the law. Even if in a place they do that, you still should not do it. Where do we learn this from? We learn it from Moshe, right? Moshe, the Gemara teaches us on Daf 37, Moshe taught for free. Therefore, we need to teach for free, right? And here the verses say that he taught the laws, chukim umishpatim. Therefore, to teach laws, you cannot charge money. But for Torah, you can charge, because usually when you're teaching Torah, right, it's usually teaching it to younger children, and younger children need to be watched, right? It's not just about teaching, but it's about, making sure that they behave, making sure that they listen, that they don't run away. Therefore, you could say you're really paying them to watch over the children. And on the side, you're also teaching them, right? Or maybe what you're being paid for is to teach the way to read the words of the Torah, right? What's called ta'amei hamikra, right? The tune, right? So like if someone takes a bar mitzvah lesson, it's very clear that you pay the bar mitzvah teacher to teach how to sing, how to lane the Torah, right? And therefore maybe that's what you are teaching, and that's what you're getting paid for. Okay, right, so the Gemara continues, since we're talking about teaching Torah. It says that children can't be taught new psukim, new verses on Shabbat, but they can review them on Shabbat. Right, so I don't know if you know, but there's a famous school in the Old City in Jerusalem that they have school basically 7 days a week. You have to live, in the Old City to, I guess, send your kids there. But on Shabbat, they go to school, and the idea is they're reviewing. It's fun. They're learning Torah in a fun atmosphere. So here the Gemara says, right? So you can review psukim on Shabbat, but not to teach them, because that it's harder to teach them, or maybe because if you're paying the teacher a salary, we don't want to teach them for actually teaching on Shabbat. Rather, just to review is okay. That's not really teaching. And from here, the Gemara teaches a concept in Hebrew called havla'ah, which means that, again, as we mentioned, we were talking about not being paid to teach Torah. The Gemara is also going to talk now about not working on Shabbat. I mean, obviously you shouldn't work on Shabbat, but what if you are a youth director or a rabbi, and part of your salary or your position is to work or do certain activities on Shabbat? So then there's something called havla'a, which means the wages of Shabbat are incorporated into the work that's done the rest of the week, right? So really, the person is getting a salary for, 5 days a week or 6 days a week, and Shabbat, oh, he's really working for free, right? He's not really getting paid on Shabbat, and that's how someone can be paid on Shabbat. The Gemara talks about, again, people who are working on a weekly or monthly or yearly salary, that works. But if you're on an hourly salary, it does not work, right? And we want to make sure that you're not getting paid specifically on Shabbat. So, questions can come up. What about someone who babysits on Shabbat? So you say maybe do something a little bit before Shabbat or a little bit after Shabbat, and then your salary is for the things you did not on Shabbat. Okay, or the Gemara gives another reason why you shouldn't teach children on Shabbat, because maybe, that'll take a long time, and then you're taking away from the family time of Shabbat, or they're going to be very tired on Shabbat because they ate such a big meal, and that's why you should not teach on Shabbat. Interestingly, the Gemara says, if we're talking about teaching, right, that you need to watch boys, but not so much girls, right? Girls will behave in the classroom, but boys, there's a lot more to guard. So I thought that was very interesting for the Gemara, that 2,000 years ago, things were pretty much the same. But from here, the Gemara talks about ta'amei hamikra, or the way, again, either the way we lane the psukim or the way we read the psukim. It is important to understand that in a Torah scroll, when you look at the verses, there is no punctuation, right? There are no periods, there's no comma, there are no vowels. So it's important to understand that there was a lot that needed to be transmitted in tradition, and that's something that, again, needed to be taught. So we said that these Ta'amei Mikra are meant to be taught without a salary because it's a biblical obligation to be able to learn Torah. Again, another thing, the Gemara tells us that it's the correct reading of words and the embellishments and what's called the Kri and Ktiv. Another thing that's important to understand when you open up a Chumash, that there are certain words that are read in a different way than they're written, right? Ktiv is the way they're written. Kri is the way we read them. And this is a tradition that was passed down from Moshe, right? This is called in Hebrew halacha leMoshe miSinai. This tradition was given to Moshe on Sinai, and it was passed again as an oral tradition all the way through the generations. And then the Gemara at the bottom of 37 gives many examples of these different vocalizations of words and examples of embellishments and of Kri and Ktiv, and how they are, that we read the words differently than the way they are written. Also, the top of 38 tells us that in Israel, they broke up the verses into, right, there was a one particular verse in Sefer Shmot, the Gemara tells us it's a very long pasuk. In Bavel, they read it as one pasuk. In Israel, they read it in 3 different verses. From here, since we're talking about interpreting or reading the Torah, the Gemara interprets different verses in different ways, meaning not from the pshat, the simple meaning of the verse. So it says that Moshe became very wealthy from the fragments of the carving of the second tablets, right? So if you remember, the first tablets were given to Moshe on Har Sinai. When Moshe came down and saw the golden calf, he drops them, he breaks them, grinds them up. The second time, God says to him, Psol lecha. You need to carve it for yourself, or you need to carve it. So what does it mean, right? Psol lecha the psolet, what's left over, right? If you're carving, what falls off will be lecha, right? Will be for you. And it seems that the Gemara explains that this was actually not a regular rock, rather it was sapphire. And therefore, all those, fragments that came off were extremely valuable, and therefore Moshe became very wealthy. What does this have to do with what we were talking about? One is how to interpret the pasuk, but also we're going to say that Moshe was a teacher of Israel. He didn't need to get paid to teach because he was independently wealthy. The Gemara continues that the Torah was for Moshe and for his descendants, and then he decided to share it with Bnei Israel, which is an interesting way to understand the giving of the Torah. However, there are many verses that contradict this, right? Rather, no, the Torah was meant for Bnei Israel, for the Jewish people, but the means to derive insight from the Torah, that was given specifically to Moshe, and that he shared with everybody else. And the Gemara continues, since we're talking about Moshe being rich, is also that the Gemara tells us that the Shekhinah, the divine presence, rests on people who are brave, rich, wise, humble, and who has all of these qualities? Moshe, right? And the Gemara brings proof from different verses how Moshe was each one of these things, right? And the idea is we don't want the person to be able to be maybe bribed or have to get paid, and rather we I guess the Gemara is saying if the person is wealthy, so then they have time to sit and learn Torah. The Gemara continues that the prophets were also wealthy. Who in particular? Moshe, as we mentioned, Shmuel, Samuel, Amos, and Yonah. Right? These are the four prophets that the Gemara tells us that were wealthy. And lastly, right, first Moshe would learn, and then it seems that he forgot his Torah, and then it was given to him as a gift, and then he remembered all of his Torah. Okay, let's continue to the next Mishnah. The next Mishnah tells us a person, again, as we mentioned, the same case, who is forbidden to have benefit from another person, can feed the other person's wife and children, even though the husband is obligated to feed them, right? But he can't feed his animals. Don't get upset, but it's okay. He can't feed his animals. Why? Because here, right, he's actually going to get benefit, because the fatter the animals are, the more valuable they are. And now the person is actually getting direct benefit from the fact that you're feeding his animals. There's a machloket whether it's all animals, right? Some say only the pure animals, or meaning pure animals. What do I mean pure? Sorry. I mean, in Hebrew we say tameh and tahor, but here we mean kosher and non-kosher animals. Or maybe you can only feed the non-kosher ones, but the kosher ones you cannot, because again, we eat the kosher animals and therefore we get direct benefit from it. But right, the Gemara says, but you sell the non-kosher ones and you also get benefit. So maybe you can, feed all animals, or you can't feed any of the animals. So the Gemara explains, right, that from this we learn you can also marry the person can also marry. Again, we have two people. One person says, I will not get any benefit from you. And then the Gemara tells us that he can marry off his daughter to him. The problem is we have a lot of he's and him, and we don't know which one is which, right? So the Gemara tries to understand, what are we talking about? Is it that the property of the chatan, of the groom, is forbidden to the father-in-law? Or is it that the property of the father-in-law is forbidden to the um, is forbidden to the groom, right? And it works either way, right? Therefore, right, when he's marrying, and the Gemara says, no, really it must be that the property of the father-in-law is forbidden to the groom, and he's marrying off his adult daughter, right? If he's marrying off his adult daughter, so then he is not supporting her, and therefore he doesn't get benefit. Um, the Gemara continues that a father, let's say a father takes a vow that he can't benefit from the son, right? So, and the Gemara explains that he wants him to go learn Torah, right? The son. So he says, I'm not going to get any benefit from you. So the Gemara says the son can still bring him water and light his lamp or roast small fish, meaning he can still do small kibud horim, right? Kibud avaim, honoring his father in small ways. Um, and from here we see, right, that if you are forbidden from benefit to a person, you can still give them it's in the Gemara, it says, kos shel shalom, right, a cup of peace. What is a cup of peace? Either it's that someone is a mourner and you bring them a cup to drink, or it's a drink at a bathhouse, which we know, like once you go, if you go to a bathhouse, it is you're very thirsty. You need to drink, and therefore you would be able to give him. You would be able to give him. You'd be able to give him that cup. So that would be okay. The so okay, let's go. The Mishnah continues. Again, you are forbidden from benefit. You can visit the person if the person is sick. However, and from here we're going to get into a discussion about visiting the sick. And the Gemara says you can go visit the person, but you have to stand and you can't sit down. You can heal the person's spirit, but not monetary healing. So we're going to see what that means. So Daf 39, the Gemara tells us that the Gemara tells us who, again, we were talking about visiting the sick. So again, the same question. Who is forbidden from who, right? Is it that the property of the visitor is forbidden to the person who is sick? So then, why would it matter? Why could he not go to visit him? Maybe it's because there were places where they used to pay people to sit and visit the sick. And therefore, if he goes and visits, so now he's getting benefit because he would normally get paid. So again, you can't get paid for standing and visiting, but you could get paid for sitting. Or maybe the sick person's property is forbidden to the visitor. And what do we say here? The person really didn't mean for the vow to include not visiting him, right? And therefore we say it's still okay for the person to go and visit him, right? And the Gemara says, what's our case? Our case is really where the visitor's property is forbidden to the sick person. Okay. Since we're talking about visiting the sick, right, Bikur Cholim, the Gemara continues that we learn in the Torah about visiting the sick from a verse in the story of Korach. Really, we see visiting the sick with Abraham, right? After his Brit Milah, we know that God goes to visit him. But here we have we have it more very clearly in the Torah, in the story of Korach, right? Korach was the person who led a revolt against Moshe in the desert. And basically, right, Moshe says, I'm right. Korach says, I'm right. And Moshe says, if I'm wrong, so may they be able to visit you in your old age and in sickness, right? So here, we see that there's this idea of when someone is sick, someone is supposed to come and visit you. And the Gemara says, right, rather, right, that this person should really die a miraculous death, which is what God does, right? God opens up, it says, the mouth of the earth, right, and swallows up Korach. And here the Gemara tells us that Hashem already created this mouth in the earth. So the Gemara tells us that there were 7 things that were created before the creation of the world, right? The Torah and Shuvah, the ability to repent, Gan Eden, Gehenom, which is hell, right? Kisei Kavod, the throne of glory, the temple, and the name of Moshiach, right? Again, one can take this literally, one can take it figuratively, the idea that these concepts all existed before even the world existed, right? These are fundamental concepts in Judaism. And the Gemara gives us verses for each one of these things and shows how they existed even before God created the world. The Gemara continues that there is no limit to Bikur Cholim, to visiting the sick. The Gemara asks, what does that mean, no limit? Either it means there's no limit to the reward, right? It's such an important thing, or there's no limit to how many times you can actually visit. If you do, or when you visit the sick, you should realize the power that you have. When you visit the sick, you take away 1/60th of the illness. The Gemara says maybe it's only, maybe not everybody, maybe only if you are ben gilo, which literally means the same person, the person is the same age, but the Gemara explains it as maybe you're the same constellation, or maybe you're the same in terms of like a kindred spirit. But either way, you are taking away some of the suffering or some of the sickness when you go and visit a person. Daf 40 continues with stories about different sages who went to go visit the sick. So a student of Rabbi Akiva was sick and no one went to visit him. So Rabbi Akiva, when he went, they were very excited that Rabbi Akiva was coming. So they swept the floor. And because they swept the floor, the student became better, right? The student healed. So he said to Rabbi Akiva, you literally saved my life. And therefore, right, the Gemara says beautifully, right, therefore Rabbi Akiva walked out the door and at that very moment said, right, if you don't visit the sick, it's as if you're killing them. Now, we would say the opposite, and someone will say that, but he was saying you don't realize the power of visiting the sick, right? Again, and I think we can understand this on many levels. I think we can understand it on a very simple level, which means, when you go visit somebody in the hospital, when you visit someone in their house, they feel better. You're cheering them up. There seems to be also a spiritual healing that's going on. The Gemara continues and says, if you visit, you're causing them to live, which is a nicer way of saying it. But if not, you're causing them to die. Less of a nice way of saying it. But again, I think the Gemara is trying to say, please recognize the power that you have. The Gemara asks, how is that really true? Because when you visit them and you see, let's say you see them suffering or you see that they're really sick, you dive in for them to get better. But if you don't visit them, you don't understand what the person is going through, and then you don't dive in for them. And again, maybe on a spiritual realm, you are causing them to continue to be sick. If you visit the sick, the Gemara continues, you will be saved from Gehenom, right? So it's interesting. We were talking about the benefits to the sick person. Here we're going to talk about the benefits to the visitor, right? You will be saved from many terrible things, right? God will save you from the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, and from suffering, and people will take pride in you, and you will have good friends, right? And all of these, the Gemara brings proofs for all of these things. But I think it's beautiful to really think about when we do things that are chesed, doing things for other people, we should do it in a selfless way, but recognize that there will be reward. You shouldn't visit the sick on the first or last 3 hours of the day, because you won't get an accurate, first of all, it's not nice to the sick person, but also you won't get an accurate assessment of the person, right? Because generally in the morning, a person feels much better. Later on, and then you might not, daven for them, you might not pray for them. Later at night, they feel worse, and then maybe you'll think, oh my gosh, like they're really dying, and therefore you should go in the middle of the day. The Gemara continues, Hashem sustains the sick person and rests above his head, right? That the divine presence is actually in the room, and therefore you shouldn't sit on top of his bed. I think it means like by his head, even though growing up, my mother always told me, you never sit on someone's hospital bed, right? You can pull up a chair, but you don't sit on their bed. So maybe that's from here, this idea that God's presence is there in the room. Rather, you should always sit lower than them, and that's what you should do. From here, we're going to interpret a verse where God asks Yechezkel, the prophet, to prepare vessels of exile. And the Gemara explains what are these vessels of exile. Right, for a person who's going into exile, you need a lamp and a bowl and a mat, right? These are things for survival. And from here, the Gemara on Daf 41 describes the importance of understanding, right? If you don't have understanding in general, then you're considered poor, right? If you have understanding, you're considered to have everything. Which goes very nicely with what we started with when we said that, right, Moshe, the teacher, was wealthy, right? So we interpreted it as physical wealth. Maybe here we're talking about more of a spiritual, intellectual wealth. A person emerges from his sickness when God forgives him of all of his sins, right? And not only that, but he becomes stronger than he was even before. And from here we see, the Gemara continues, that illness causes people to forget their learning. And very famously, Rav Yosef was sick, and he forgot all of his Torah. He was a very wise sage. He forgot all of his Torah. And this is something we see all over Shas, where Rav Yosef will say, I don't remember this. And then Abaye, right, will say, right, as a student, will say, no, you taught it to us. And he teaches it back to Rav Yosef. So this is, here the Gemara explains that it's from an illness, and all over the Gemara we see this idea of Rav Yosef not remembering his own teachings. Another story, Rebbe was sick and lost his knowledge, and Rabbi Chia restored part of that knowledge. But interestingly, who restored the other part? The person was the laundryman, the person who was doing laundry in Rebbe's house or near the study hall in the yeshiva. And he said, I actually, right, heard you repeating all of your learning, and I heard it and I remembered it. And therefore, he was able to restore Rebbe's knowledge based on just listening. The Gemara says, right, it's harder to save a person from illness, which is heavenly fire, than from a natural fire. Right, the story that the Gemara brings up are the three, right, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, the three people that God saved from a fiery furnace, and they were saved. And the Gemara says it's a greater miracle to heal somebody who is sick than to save them from a burning fire. And I think that this is just really important, especially for us nowadays, when we live in a world of modern medicine. I think that some people take take it for granted, right? We're sick, we take a pill, we get better, right? It's a very natural progression, a very natural response, and everything just works. Unfortunately, till it doesn't. But I think here the Gemara is saying, recognize it already in the beginning, right? Recognize the greatness of the fact that if you have fever and you take an Advil, you will feel better. It's not that, I mean, yes, the pill is great, but recognize the greatness on a deeper level. And I think that this is very important. Again, I think that this Gemara is teaching us the importance of visiting the sick and to recognize the spiritual aspects to sickness as well. The last thing for today, the Gemara tells us that also, as we said, it's very important to visit people who are sick, but we also need to be sensitive. And if that visit will make the person uncomfortable, then we shouldn't do it, right? So the Gemara says you shouldn't visit someone with intestinal disease, right? Because they have to go to the bathroom. It's really not comfortable. If someone has an eye illness or a headache, right? Those of you who have ever had a headache, we know that when someone comes to talk to us, that's not what we really want at that time, right? So the Gemara actually says, right, it's not good for these people to have visitors. Speech is harmful to an eye infection or illness, but it's actually good for a fever. So it's interesting. Again, I always say it's fascinating to see how progressive, how much the Gemara understood, I think, human nature, and really to understand, I think here, the lesson, I think, is very clear, the importance of visiting the sick, taking care of the sick, even if it's not a visit, but maybe sending over a meal. All of these things are extremely important. And with that, I wish everyone a Shabbat Shalom, which is literally in an hour and a half. So wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom. So just a reminder, next week there won't be class. The week after there will be class at our regular time, but on a different day. It will be on Wednesday night instead of on Tuesday. So again, I apologize for some of the changes, but at least we will have our consistent learning, albeit not on the same day as we usually do. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom.